Are you prepared for the end of the world? My parents made us train for the apocalypse because they said unprepared children were as good as dead. By the time I turned 16, the training was so extreme that one of us almost didn't survive it. My parents moved us to the middle of nowhere when I was 8, saying society was about to collapse and only the strong would survive. They homeschooled us with half regular subjects and half survival skills, and Dad quit his job to focus on family security full-time. At first, the training seemed almost fun, like extreme camping. We learned to build fires without matches, find water in the forest, identify edible plants. But then they started waking us up at random times for surprise drills. 3 in the morning, and suddenly the house would be full of smoke bombs while they screamed that we had 2 minutes to grab our bags and meet at the rally point. If you were too slow or forgot something important, you had to sleep outside without a tent as punishment. By the time I was 12, the training was way more intense. We had to run 5 miles every morning carrying 20-pound packs, even my 8-year-old sister Luna. If someone threw up or collapsed, we all had to start over. Dad would chase us through the woods playing the role of hostile survivors. And if he caught you, you had to do hundreds of push-ups until your arms gave out. Mom taught us hand-to-hand combat, but she didn't pull her punches with kids, and I lost a tooth when she demonstrated a defensive move too hard. The food situation was insane too because they said we needed to be ready for starvation conditions. We'd have normal meals for a week, then suddenly nothing but rice and beans for a month to toughen our systems. Sometimes they'd hide all the food and make us forage, competing against each other because only the fastest got to eat. My brother Gabe got so skinny his ribs showed, and Luna started hiding food in her room until Mom found it and made her eat rotten meat as punishment for hoarding. When I was 14, Dad announced that we weren't getting hard enough fast enough. He started something called Hell Week once a month where we had to survive in the woods with nothing but a knife. No shelter, no food, no water unless we found it ourselves. They'd drop us in different spots miles apart so we couldn't help each other. The first time, I drank bad water and got so sick I hallucinated. But when I crawled home, Dad just said disease resistance was crucial for survival. They made us fight each other with padding and headgear at first, but eventually Dad said real combat didn't come with protection. My older brother Caleb broke my nose during a training bout, and Mom said it herself without painkillers because she said medical supplies wouldn't exist after society collapsed. When Luna cried about having to fight her siblings, they made her stand guard duty all night in freezing rain because emotional weakness would get the whole family killed in the new world. The weapons training started with paintball guns that left welts the size of tennis balls. Then Dad decided paint wasn't realistic enough, and switched to rubber rounds that could break skin. He built an obstacle course with barbed wire you had to crawl under while he shot at you, saying real enemies wouldn't aim high. Caleb's back looked like hamburger meat from getting caught on the wire while trying to move fast enough to avoid getting hit. The summer I turned 16, they announced the final test. Each of us would be hunted through the woods for 24 hours by Dad and his survivalist buddies. If we got caught, we failed the family, and would be sent to live with weak relatives in the city. But first, they said, we had to prove we could handle interrogation. They tied Caleb to a chair and Dad's friend put a cloth over his face, pouring water over it while demanding he give up our safe house location. Caleb passed out twice before they stopped. When it was Luna's turn, something in me snapped. She was only 12 and already had scars covering her body from years of this insane training. I couldn't watch them torture her too. I told them I'd take her place, do her interrogation, and her hunt. Dad laughed and said that kind of weakness would get us all killed, that Luna needed to learn just like everyone else. That night, they separated us into different rooms to prepare for tomorrow's hunt. I could hear Luna crying through the walls and Gabe throwing up from fear. They'd turned us into child soldiers for a war that wasn't even happening, breaking our bodies and minds for their paranoid fantasy. I tried to get to Luna, but my door was locked from the outside. In the morning, they lined us up and handed us each a single water bottle and compass. Dad's friends were already in the woods, armed with rubber rounds and worse. He explained the rules one more time. Survive 24 hours without getting caught or become dead to the family forever. As they pointed us toward the tree line, I saw one of the men loading what looked like real ammunition, not the rubber kind. Dad saw me notice and smiled. Time to find out if all that training paid off, he said, checking his watch. You have a 5-minute head start. Run. I grabbed Luna's hand the second Dad finished talking and we bolted into the trees together. My feet pounded against the pine needles as I yanked her hard to the left, away from the deep woods where we always trained. Gabe shot off straight ahead like we'd practiced 100 times. Caleb went right toward the ravine. But I pulled Luna in a completely different direction, toward where I remembered the old logging road cut through the forest about 2 miles west. She tried to tug her hand free and veer toward our usual hiding spot under the fallen oak tree. I kept my grip tight and shook my head, dragging her through the underbrush instead. The creek was just ahead and I crashed through the bushes until we hit the water. I pulled her downstream, letting the current wash away our footprints on the muddy bank. Luna's face was confused, but she trusted me enough to splash along without asking questions. My legs burned from the sprint, but I kept us moving fast through the shallow water. Behind us, I could hear Dad's whistle echoing through the trees, the signal that meant the hunters were spreading out. 20 minutes of running through the creek and my lungs felt like they were on fire. Then a sound cracked through the forest that made my blood freeze. Not the dull thump of rubber rounds hitting trees like we'd trained with for years. This was sharp and loud, the unmistakable crack of a real bullet. Bark exploded off a pine tree maybe 50 feet to our right. Luna went completely rigid beside me. I grabbed her shoulders and shoved her behind a huge boulder at the creek's edge. Another shot rang out, closer this time. My brain couldn't process what was happening, but my body knew we had to move. I peeked around the rock and saw something glinting in the dirt near where the first shot hit. A shell casing, still hot from being fired. I scrambled over and grabbed it, the metal burning my fingers. This was evidence, proof of what they were doing to us. I tore a strip from the bottom of my shirt and wrapped the casing carefully to preserve any fingerprints. Luna was shaking behind the boulder and I had to physically pull her to her feet. We stayed low and moved back into the creek, but this time I led us upstream, doubling back the way we'd come. Every trick Dad had drilled into us about losing trackers, I used backwards now. I kicked rocks to make it look like we'd gone downstream. I broke branches pointing away from where we were actually heading. Luna started to understand when I whispered that we were getting help, not playing their sick game anymore. Her eyes went wide, but she nodded and helped me lay false trails. My foot caught on a submerged root and I went down hard, my big toe catching the edge of a sharp rock. Blood immediately started pouring from the gash. I bit down on my lip to keep from crying out. Luna started to offer me her water bottle, but I waved her off. We didn't know how long we'd be running and she needed to save it. I pulled off my sock, wrapped it tight around my toe and shoved my foot back in my shoe. The pain made me want to throw up, but I forced myself to keep moving. 2 hours had passed according to the sun's position when I finally remembered the logging road clearly from one of Dad's old maps. He'd made us memorize every trail and road in a 10-mile radius, never thinking I'd use that knowledge against him. I angled us northwest, staying in the trees but moving parallel to where the road should be. Behind us, I could hear the hunters spreading out in their search pattern. They were moving in a grid, expecting us to hunker down and hide like we'd been trained. They didn't expect us to run for civilization. My bloody sock squished with every step, but I kept us moving through the thick underbrush. Finally, through the trees ahead, I saw the blessed sight of gravel road. We burst out of the tree line just as a beat-up pickup truck came around the bend. I didn't think, just threw myself into the middle of the road, waving my arms like crazy. The driver slammed on his brakes, staying in his cab when he saw us. 2 girls covered in dirt and blood probably looked insane. I ran to his window, which he only cracked open an inch. I begged him to call 911, words tumbling out about being hunted by our father and his friends with real guns. The driver's eyes went wide, and he pulled out his phone immediately. He made the call while keeping his doors locked, probably thinking we were on drugs or something. Luna pressed against my side, her whole body trembling. In the distance, I heard Dad's whistle again. 3 short blasts. That meant the hunt was getting serious, that they were done playing around. The driver stayed on with the dispatcher, giving our location on the logging road. He kept glancing at us nervously but didn't unlock his doors. I didn't blame him. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser came flying down the road with lights flashing. Deputy Ross Farrell stepped out, hand on his weapon until he saw we were just kids. I immediately pulled out the shell casing, unwrapping it carefully to show him while words poured out about the hunt and the years of training. He looked at my bloody foot soaking through my shoe, then at Luna's arms where old scars showed through the dirt. He got on his radio right away, calling for backup and medical. Ross opened the back door of his cruiser and helped us inside while still talking on his radio about needing CPS and more units to search for my brothers who were still out there. The back seat smelled like old coffee and cleaning products, but at least it was safe with thick glass between us and the outside world. He grabbed his camera from the front seat and started taking pictures of the cuts on my arms from branches, the bruises on Luna's legs from previous training sessions that hadn't healed yet. My bloody sock left marks on the floor mat as he photographed my wrapped foot. Then he put on latex gloves and carefully picked up the shell casing I'd saved, dropping it into a small plastic bag he labeled with a black marker. Luna pressed against my side shaking while he asked basic questions about our ages and how long we'd been in the woods, writing everything down in a small notebook. More sirens came down the logging road and soon an ambulance pulled up behind us with 2 paramedics who checked us over quickly before saying we needed the hospital for proper treatment. The ride took forever with Luna gripping my hand so tight her nails dug into my palm, but I didn't pull away because she needed something to hold on to. At the emergency room, they put us in a curtained area and a nurse with gray hair and gentle hands started documenting every mark on our bodies with a special camera. I explained each scar as she photographed them, pointing to the long one on my shoulder from barbed wire training. When I was 13, the burn mark on Luna's arm from when Mom made her hold her hand over a candle to prove she could handle pain, the jagged scar on my knee from falling during a night navigation drill. The nurse's face got tighter with each explanation, but she kept her voice calm, telling us we were brave for getting help. Luna wouldn't let go of my hand even when they needed to examine her other arm, so the nurse worked around our clasped fingers. A woman in a business suit showed up while they were still photographing, introducing herself as Francine Webb from CPS. She had kind eyes, but I could see her reading the medical report over the nurse's shoulder and watching her face change as she took in the list of old injuries. Francine explained they were filing for emergency custody, which meant we wouldn't be going home tonight or any night soon, that a judge would decide where we stayed while they investigated. Her voice stayed professional, but when she saw the x-ray showing Luna's arm had been broken and healed wrong without proper medical care, she had to turn away for a second to compose herself. About an hour later, we heard Mom's voice in the hallway demanding to see her daughters, using her fake sweet voice she saved for public. Security blocked her at the desk when Francine told them not to let her through, and we could hear Mom switch from concerned parent to angry in about 2 seconds, yelling about her rights and threatening to sue everyone. Francine stayed with us behind the curtain, holding up her phone to record Mom's threats echoing down the hall, which proved exactly what I'd been trying to tell them about how she really was. They moved us to a different room after that, and Francine helped me give a recorded statement to another officer about the hunt, and all the training leading up to it. My voice shook when I described the waterboarding and the hell weeks, but I pushed through because Luna needed me to stay strong and get us somewhere safe. Ross came back and asked me to draw a map of our property to help the search team find my brothers without walking into any of Dad's traps. I sketched out the compound on the hospital paper, marking the main house, the shed where Dad kept weapons, the trails we used for training, and all the spots where he'd set up tripwires and pit traps during our exercises. My hand cramped from gripping the pen too tight as I tried to remember every detail that might help them get Caleb and Gabe out safely. Ross explained the search team was having problems because Dad was refusing to let anyone on the property, screaming about his parental rights and government overreach, so they needed a warrant, which took time. Every minute that passed made my stomach hurt worse thinking about my brothers still out there, not knowing if Dad would hurt them for us escaping, or if his friends were still hunting them. The ER doctor came in next, an older man with careful hands who explained everything before he touched us. He found old fractures in 3 of my ribs that had healed without being set properly, and Luna's arm showed signs of a break that never got treated right, which explained why she couldn't straighten it all the way. The x-rays showed other old injuries too. Stress fractures in my feet from the forced marches with heavy packs, damage to Luna's growth plates from carrying too much weight when her bones were still developing. He documented everything carefully, adding medical neglect to the abuse charges, speaking gently the whole time so we knew he wasn't trying to hurt us like the adults we were used to. Francine sat with me and explained what would happen if Dad tried to contact me, giving me her cell number on a business card, and making me promise to call if he reached out. She said if he called, I should keep him talking so they could trace it, but never agree to meet him anywhere, and she promised she wouldn't leave us alone through any of this. My phone buzzed with texts from an unknown number that had to be Dad, but I gave it straight to Francine, who screenshotted everything before blocking it. Word came through Ross's radio that deputies were trying to enter the compound, but Dad had barricaded the gates, and they could hear him ranting through a megaphone about the government trying to destroy families and steal children. They pulled back to avoid making things worse while my brothers were still inside, waiting for the special response team that knew how to handle armed suspects with hostages. An hour later, Ross's phone rang and he stepped away to answer it, coming back with relief on his face to tell me the judge had approved emergency entry to get my brothers out. He promised they'd go in careful but fast, knowing every minute counted with Dad getting more unstable. I suddenly remembered the old walkie we'd hidden in the shed years ago for secret talks during drills, and I asked the nurse if they had a radio I could try. She brought me to the nurse's station where they had an old CB set up for emergencies, and I clicked through channels until I found our old frequency. Firefly to Moonbeam, I whispered our code words from when Luna was 7. Static filled the speaker for what felt like forever, before a tiny voice came back. Moonbeam here. My legs almost gave out hearing Luna's voice. She whispered that she and Gabe were hiding in the root cellar under the old barn, that Dad had been screaming and breaking things upstairs for hours. I told her help was coming, to stay hidden no matter what she heard, and she made me promise we'd be together soon before the signal cut out. The desk phone rang and Francine grabbed it, then held it toward me with her hand over the speaker. Your father, she mouthed. I shook my head, but she gestured for me to listen without talking, while she had another officer start tracing the call. Dad's voice came through smooth at first, asking if I was okay, saying this was all a misunderstanding and we needed to come home. When I stayed silent, his tone shifted, getting harder, demanding to know where Luna was, saying I was destroying our family with my weakness. His voice kept switching between caring father and barely controlled fury, promising to forgive me 1 second, then describing what happens to traitors the next. Francine kept me on for 3 minutes before signaling to hang up, and she said they'd tracked him to a gas station 20 miles from our property. Security suddenly rushed past the nurse's station toward the elevator, radios crackling about a suspicious person in the parking garage. Through the window, I saw 2 guards running toward a truck where one of Dad's survivalist buddies was sitting, the same guy who'd loaded real bullets during the hunt. They surrounded his vehicle while calling for backup, and Francine immediately moved us away from the windows into an interior room with no outside access. He's checking exits, she said, locking the door behind us. The reality hit me hard that getting out was just the beginning, that Dad's whole network of paranoid friends would see us as traitors to their cause. Ross came back to take me in his squad car to show them where I'd seen muzzle flashes during the hunt, saying the forensics team needed the exact location. We drove the back roads toward our property but stopped a mile away, walking into the field where I'd hidden that first morning. I pointed out the tree where bark had exploded near my head, and Ross found 2 more shell casings in the leaves that looked just like the one I'd saved. The forensics photographer took pictures from every angle while another officer used metal detectors to sweep for more evidence. I kept my eyes on the trees, trying not to think about how close those shots had come, how different this would be if Dad's aim had been better. We'd been back at the hospital for maybe an hour when I went to use the bathroom down the hall. The door opened before I could lock it and Mom pushed inside, closing it quick behind her. She grabbed my shoulders, speaking fast about how this was all wrong, how we'd misunderstood the training, how Dad was just trying to prepare us for a dangerous world. Her fingers dug into my arms when I didn't answer, leaving marks through my shirt as she shook me, insisting I had to fix this before our family was destroyed. I stayed silent like Francine had taught me, not giving her anything to twist, until she raised her hand like she might hit me. The door burst open and 2 security guards pulled her away while she screamed about her parental rights. They documented the fresh bruises on my arms before taking her away in handcuffs. That evening, Francine explained they were moving Luna and me to a youth shelter for safety, a place with locks and round-the-clock staff who understood our situation. The shelter was an old house converted for kids in crisis, with cameras everywhere and a security desk by the only door. Our room had 2 beds and a tiny window with bars. Nothing like home, but somehow safer because of it. Neither of us could sleep, jumping at every sound in the hallway, checking the door lock over and over. Luna climbed into my bed around midnight, and we lay there listening to footsteps and voices, both of us ready to run even though we had nowhere to go. The next morning, a woman with gentle eyes came to do my formal interview, explaining she was specially trained to document abuse cases for court. She had me start from the beginning, describing every detail of our training, how it had started almost like camping but turned into something else. I told her about Hell Week, about drinking bad water and hallucinating, about Caleb getting waterboarded while Dad's friend demanded information. She stopped me several times to compose herself, especially when I described Luna standing guard in freezing rain as punishment for crying. The interview took 3 hours with breaks, filling pages with details I'd never thought I'd tell anyone. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and my heart dropped thinking it was Dad again. But it was Gabe using a phone he'd hidden months ago. Can't leave Luna alone in cellar. Dad getting worse. Hearing things breaking. Please hurry. My hands shook as I showed Francine the message. She immediately called Ross while I texted back that Luna was safe with me, that help was coming for him and Caleb, to hold on just a little longer. Ross arrived within minutes to go over the property layout one more time before the entry team went in. I drew every trap I could remember, the tripwires Dad had rigged during drills, the pit traps covered with branches, his favorite spots for hiding weapons. The entry team was bringing bomb squad backup because of Dad's paranoia about government invasion, his constant talk about rigged perimeters and defensive positions. I explained about the propane tanks he'd buried near the gate, the shotgun shells he'd turned into makeshift alarms, the pattern of his paranoid thinking that would make him dangerous when cornered. Ross radioed the team to move in while I watched the live feed from his dashboard screen, my hands gripping the seat as officers surrounded our property. The extraction team moved through the woods wearing body armor and carrying shields, checking for tripwires and avoiding the spots I'd marked on the map. Luna's voice crackled through the radio from the root cellar, saying she couldn't leave, that Dad would be so mad, that maybe this was another test to see if she'd stay loyal. A female deputy knelt by the cellar door talking soft and steady while Luna cried that she didn't know what was real anymore. The deputy kept saying Luna was safe now, that her sister was waiting for her, that nobody would hurt her for leaving. It took 40 minutes of gentle coaxing before Luna finally climbed out, her face streaked with dirt and tears, clutching the old stuffed rabbit she'd hidden down there years ago. Gabe came out right behind her, his arm around her shoulders even though his own legs were shaking. The moment they saw police everywhere, Dad bolted from the house into the tree line, moving fast through paths only we knew about. The officers held their positions instead of chasing him, creating a wide circle around the property, while Ross explained they wouldn't risk a confrontation with my siblings still in danger. Mom stood on the porch screaming about government overreach and constitutional rights until they cuffed her for interfering with the extraction. Caleb walked out on his own, his face blank like he'd shut down completely, and let the EMTs check him over without saying a word. They brought Luna and Gabe to the station where I was waiting, and Luna crashed into me so hard we both nearly fell over. 2 days later, we sat in a courtroom while a judge looked at photos of our scars and bruises, her face getting harder with each image. She played my recorded statement about the hunt and the live rounds, stopping twice to compose herself when my voice described Caleb getting waterboarded. The judge granted immediate emergency custody to CPS with 0 contact from our parents pending the criminal investigation. That night, Francine explained they had to split us between 2 foster homes because nowhere had 4 beds available on such short notice. Luna would stay with me at one house while Gabe and Caleb went to another 20 minutes away. Gabe's face crumpled when she said it, but I grabbed his hand and promised we'd see each other all the time, that this was just temporary until they found a place for all of us. The foster home was a regular house in a regular neighborhood, with a lady who'd done this for years, and knew not to ask too many questions yet. Luna and I shared a room with 2 twin beds, and a window that actually opened. No bars or locks or escape routes mapped out. She had nightmares every single night that first week, waking up ready to run, checking for her bug-out bag that wasn't there anymore. 5 days after we arrived, I sat in the guidance counselor's office at the local high school, staring at a course catalog full of classes I'd never heard of. She helped me pick basic stuff like English and math, plus some electives, explaining how regular school worked with bells and periods and lunch breaks. Everything felt weird and loud and normal, kids everywhere talking about movies and dating and sports, like the world wasn't dangerous at all. My first therapy appointment happened the next week in a small office with soft chairs and tissues everywhere. The therapist started asking about the training, but I told her straight up I wasn't ready to dive into all that yet, that I needed to learn how to exist in the normal world first. She backed off immediately, and we spent the session talking about breathing exercises and grounding techniques for when my brain started scanning for threats that weren't there. Ross called me a few days later to warn that some online prepper forums were calling us liars and saying we were crisis actors hired by the government to make survivalists look bad. He told me to stay off social media completely, to focus on healing instead of reading conspiracy theories about our own lives. I deleted every app on the phone Francine had given me, and tried not to think about strangers discussing whether our scars were real. Ada Bennett Riddle met with me at the courthouse to explain the charges against our parents, laying out evidence folders full of medical reports and photos and witness statements. He said Dad was looking at serious time for child endangerment and assault with a deadly weapon, but warned the legal process would take months or maybe years. He was honest that Mom would probably get probation with mandated counseling since she hadn't directly hurt us as much, just enabled Dad and enforced his rules. The nightmares hit me hard every single night, waking up convinced I heard Dad's whistle or smelled smoke bombs in the house. My body wanted to run, but I forced myself to get up and put on regular clothes and catch the school bus like a normal kid. School became my anchor even when I spent every class period memorizing exits and watching for movement in my peripheral vision. 3 weeks in, Mom's lawyer delivered a letter she'd written from jail, mixing apologies with accusations that we'd misunderstood everything. She wrote that the training was about love and preparation, that we'd twisted it into something ugly, that someday we'd thank them for making us strong. I handed it straight to Francine without responding, because there was nothing to say to someone who still didn't understand what they'd done to us. 3 weeks later, they scheduled our first supervised visit with Mom at the County Family Services building, a plain room with toys nobody played with and a two-way mirror. Mom walked in wearing her best church dress and immediately tried to hug us, but the supervisor said no physical contact until trust was established. She sat down across from us and started crying about how much she missed us, how the house was so empty, how she was praying for our family every day. Her hands reached across the table like she wanted to hold ours, but when the supervisor looked at her clipboard, Mom pulled them back and folded them in her lap. She asked Luna about school and my sister just stared at the wall, so Mom turned to me and said she'd been talking to our pastor about family healing. While she talked about forgiveness and misunderstandings, her eyes locked on mine with that look I knew from training, the one that meant we were being tested and better not fail. Her fingers tapped the table in the pattern she used to signal danger during drills. 3 quick taps, then 2 slow ones. Luna started breathing fast and grabbed my hand under the table, squeezing so hard her nails dug into my palm. Mom kept talking about how she'd redecorated our rooms and saved all our things exactly where we left them, but her eyes stayed cold and flat while her mouth smiled. When the supervisor wrote something down, Mom immediately shifted to asking if we needed anything, if our foster family was treating us well, if we were eating enough. Luna's whole body started shaking and she whispered she needed the bathroom, so the supervisor called a break. In the hallway, Luna threw up in a trash can while I rubbed her back, and when we came back, the supervisor said we'd end early today. Mom protested that she'd barely gotten any time, but the supervisor was already standing up, saying something about adjustment periods. 2 days later, Francine called to say the supervisor had filed a report about concerning behavior patterns and recommended changes to the visitation schedule. She'd noticed Mom's coded signals and Luna's panic response, suggesting shorter visits with a specialist trained in manipulation tactics. The judge approved it within a week, cutting visits to 30 minutes twice a month with a different kind of supervisor who knew what to look for. Small victories felt huge when everything else was falling apart. Bennett called me the next morning about a problem with evidence from the hospital, saying some photos of our injuries had been misfiled and weren't in the chain of custody. The defense was trying to get them thrown out as inadmissible, claiming they couldn't verify when they were taken or by whom. I remembered the nurse who took them had a butterfly tattoo on her wrist and wore purple scrubs, details that helped them track her down. She confirmed taking the photos and signed an affidavit about the process, but it took 3 days of searching through hospital records to find the originals in the wrong patient file. They'd been filed under Luna's old nickname instead of her legal name, a simple mistake that almost wrecked a key piece of evidence. After that, Bennett started double-checking every single document, making me review anything I'd touched or signed. Ross called a few days later with an idea about the old house, asking if I'd hidden anything there that might help the case. I told him about an SD card I'd hidden in my bedroom vent after recording Dad's rants about the government and his plans for when society collapsed. He said he could get a warrant to search, but it would be better if I came to show them exactly where since the house had so many hiding spots from our training. The drive back felt wrong, passing familiar trees and that crooked mailbox, seeing our property with yellow tape across the driveway. 2 deputies went in first to make sure it was clear. Then I walked through our front door for the first time since running into the woods. Everything looked the same but felt poisoned, like the walls remembered what happened here. My room still had blood on the floor from my foot injury, and the vent cover came off easily when I used the butter knife I'd hidden behind my dresser. The SD card was wrapped in plastic right where I'd left it, along with 2 others I'd forgotten about. Ross bagged them as evidence while I tried not to look at the family photos still hanging in the hallway. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew it was Dad from the first word. He wrote about remembering when I was 6 and we built that treehouse together, how proud he was when I hammered my first nail straight, how those were the good days before things got complicated. He said he knew I was confused and scared, but someday I'd understand he only wanted us strong enough to survive anything. He mentioned Mom crying herself to sleep and asked if I really wanted to destroy our family over some tough training that made us who we are. My hands shook as I screenshotted everything and forwarded it to Bennett without typing a single word back, though part of me wanted to ask him why he loaded real bullets if he loved us so much. School got easier after a month of practice, learning when to talk and when to stay quiet about my past. In history class, we were discussing different cultures, and the teacher asked about homeschooling experiences, looking right at me since everyone knew I was new. I said my parents focused on practical skills and outdoor education, that we learned a lot about nature and self-sufficiency, keeping it vague enough to sound normal. A few kids asked if we lived off-grid, and I said partially, that we had solar panels and grew our own food, steering away from the darker stuff. One girl said that sounded cool, like camping all the time, and I just nodded instead of explaining how wrong she was. Later at lunch, some kid made a joke about doomsday preppers hoarding toilet paper and building bunkers for the zombie apocalypse, and everyone laughed. I put down my sandwich and told him those weren't jokes to me, that my family took that stuff seriously, and he needed to stop. He looked surprised but mumbled sorry, and changed the subject to football or something. Bennett met with me after school to practice testimony, setting up a mock courtroom in his office with chairs arranged like a real trial. He played Dad's lawyer, asking if my parents ever hurt me on purpose, or if maybe I misunderstood strict discipline as abuse. He twisted my words, suggesting the training was just unusual parenting, that lots of families did sports or camping, that we were making it sound worse than it was. We practiced me staying calm, sticking to facts, not getting emotional when he implied I was exaggerating or lying. He warned me the real lawyer would be worse, would bring up any time I'd ever lied about anything, would try to make the jury think we were ungrateful kids who didn't appreciate parents who wanted us prepared for emergencies. That night, Luna came to my room crying, saying she needed to tell me something about the hunt. She'd seen Dad loading real bullets the night before but thought it was another test, that he was checking if we'd snitch or stay loyal to the family. She'd been too scared to tell anyone, thinking if she said something he'd know she failed the test and make the punishment worse. I held her while she sobbed about almost getting us killed by staying quiet, but I told her she was 12 and terrified and did the best she could. We survived, and that's what mattered, not what we should have done differently. She fell asleep in my bed, and I stayed awake thinking about all the tests that weren't really tests. All the times we thought we were being trained when really we were just being hurt. The next morning, Bennett called with huge news about one of Dad's survivalist friends who'd been arrested on weapons charges. The guy wanted a plea deal and offered to testify about the hunt, confirming Dad told them to use live ammunition if any of us tried to leave the property line. He had text messages from Dad saying escapees needed to be stopped by any means necessary, that this was real training for real consequences. Bennett said this changed everything from child endangerment to attempted murder, that Dad was looking at 20 years minimum now. 3 weeks later, Bennett called saying they'd tracked Dad to a storage unit on the edge of town where he'd been hiding with some of his prepper buddies. The cops surrounded the place at dawn, and I watched the news footage later, seeing him walk out with his hands up. No big shootout or last stand like I'd imagined. He looked smaller somehow without his guns and his compound, just a middle-aged guy in dirty clothes who'd been sleeping on a cot next to boxes of MREs. They cuffed him and put him in the back of a squad car while his friends scattered, and part of me couldn't believe the man who'd terrorized us for years went down so easy. At the bail hearing 2 days later, the judge looked at the evidence photos and listened to Bennett describe the hunt with real bullets, then denied bail completely. She ordered all Dad's weapons surrendered and called him a clear danger to his children and society, using words like unconscionable and systematic torture that made Mom shift in her seat behind us. That night, I actually slept for more than 2 hours straight, not waking up every time a branch scraped the window or a car drove by. Luna slept through the whole night too, curled up next to me without crying out from nightmares even once. Bennett met with us the next week to explain that Mom had agreed to testify against Dad in exchange for reduced charges, which meant she'd only get probation instead of prison time. It felt weird watching her choose saving herself over standing by him, but I guess that's what she'd always done, just in different ways. She'd sit in court and tell them about the training and the hunt, pretending she was another victim instead of someone who broke my nose setting it without medicine. 2 months passed with us split between foster homes before Francine finally found a placement that could take all 4 of us together. Jolene Peacock lived in a big old house near town with 5 bedrooms and a yard that wasn't surrounded by barbed wire or trip lines. She was in her 60s with gray hair and strong hands from years of fostering kids, and when she picked us up, she didn't try to hug us or act like everything would be fine now. She just showed us our rooms and explained the house rules, which were mostly about chores and homework and being respectful, nothing about combat readiness or perimeter checks. The first week was strange because we kept waiting for the catch, for her to suddenly start screaming about weakness or making us run laps, but she just cooked regular meals and helped us register for school. We all started at the public school together even though we were at different grade levels, and the counselor helped us pick classes based on what we'd missed during years of survival training, instead of real education. Luna signed up for art club after seeing the paintings in the hallway, and her hands shook when she held the permission slip, but she turned it in anyway. Gabe joined the track team because he figured all those morning runs with packs should count for something, though he had to learn to run without checking behind him for Dad chasing us. I stuck to regular classes at first, too overwhelmed by the crowds and noise to think about activities, but watching my siblings try normal things made me proud and sad at the same time. In therapy, I'd been working on talking about the worst parts without shutting down, and one session I managed to describe my first hell week all the way through without dissociating. I told the therapist about drinking the bad water and getting so sick I saw things that weren't there, crawling through mud while burning up with fever, Dad finding me and making me get up anyway because enemies wouldn't care if I was sick. She said staying present through the whole memory was a breakthrough, but I just felt tired like I'd actually lived through it again. 3 months after his arrest, Dad took a plea deal for felony child endangerment and assault, getting 8 years in prison instead of the 20 he could have faced at trial. Bennett explained it was better than risking a jury trial where a good lawyer might get him less time, but there was no satisfaction in it for me, just this quiet relief that he couldn't reach us anymore. Mom got probation with mandated counseling and supervised visitation only if we wanted it, and the judge made it clear any violation would mean immediate prison time. Luna and Gabe didn't want to see her at all, but I went once just to look her in the eye as an equal, not a scared kid following orders. She tried to cry and apologize, but I just sat there watching her performance, knowing she was sorry she got caught, not sorry for what she did. After 6 months at Jolene's, she took me to get my learner's permit at the DMV, and I passed the written test on the first try, even though my hands were shaking. We practiced driving in empty parking lots on Sunday mornings, and having control over where I could go felt like the opposite of everything I'd known before. She was patient when I'd freeze up seeing woods beside the road, or when I'd check the mirrors too much looking for someone following us. Gabe's weight was finally normal by then, his ribs not showing anymore, and his face filling out from regular meals and no more food competitions. One night at dinner, he actually made a joke about Jolene's meatloaf being better than MRES, and we all laughed. Real laughs, not the nervous kind. And it felt like such a normal moment that I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to cry. When I came back from the bathroom, Luna was showing Jolene a flyer about her school's art night next week and asking if we could go. The idea of Luna performing in front of strangers made my stomach tight, but Jolene said of course we'd all be there to support her. Luna practiced her pottery presentation every night, moving her hands to show how she shaped the clay, while I sat on her bed listening to her explain glazing techniques she'd learned in class. The morning of art night, she threw up from nerves and almost backed out, but Gabe told her she was braver than any of us for putting her work out there. We got to the school early, and Luna immediately checked both exits in the cafeteria, then checked them again 5 minutes later. But she stayed instead of running like she wanted to. Her pottery pieces sat on a table with a little card showing her name and grade, 3 bowls and a vase she'd made from scratch, and when people stopped to look at them, she stood straighter even though her hands were shaking. She made it through her whole presentation about working with clay, only stumbling once when a door slammed somewhere, and afterward she actually smiled when her art teacher said she had real talent. 2 weeks later, we sat in the courthouse for Dad's sentencing hearing, Bennett having prepared me to read my victim impact statement even though my whole body wanted to run. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, just rows of benches and a judge's bench that seemed too high, and Dad sat at a table in an orange jumpsuit looking smaller than I remembered. When the judge called me forward, I walked to the podium with my typed pages, my hands steady even though my heart was pounding, and I looked right at Dad before I started reading. I told the court about childhood stolen by paranoia, about scars that would never fade, about siblings who still woke up screaming, about years we'd never get back. I talked about Luna's nightmares and Gabe's food hoarding and Caleb's panic attacks, and my own inability to trust that any safe place would stay safe. I didn't cry or shake, just read each word clear and strong, then folded my papers and walked back to my seat without looking at him again. The judge sentenced him to 8 years, and Mom got probation with mandatory counseling, and we left through a side door while Dad was led away in shackles. 3 weeks after that, we were having dinner at Jolene's, just a regular Tuesday with spaghetti and garlic bread, and Gabe was arguing with Luna about what movie to watch later, while I helped pass the salad bowl around the table. Everything about it was so normal, so ordinary, but that's what made it feel impossible. Like we were actors in someone else's life instead of kids who'd been hunted through the woods 6 months ago. Jolene asked about my homework, and I mentioned having to walk a nature trail to identify plants for biology class, which would have been a joke before, but now felt like facing down a monster. The next day, I drove to the trail with my notebook and plant guide, parking in the public lot where other cars meant other people would be around, not like the isolation we'd known before. 10 minutes into the walk, a branch cracked loud behind me and my whole body froze, muscles ready to run or fight, but I made myself breathe slow and deep like the therapist taught me. I turned around slow to see just a jogger passing by, waving as he went, and I waved back even though my hand was still trembling from the adrenaline spike. I finished the trail and identified all 12 plants on my list, writing notes about each one while my body slowly remembered that not every forest wanted to hurt me. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my journal, the one Jolene bought me to help process everything, and I wrote about how strength used to mean never showing weakness, but now it meant asking for help when I needed it. I wrote about setting boundaries with Mom, about trusting Jolene even when my brain screamed danger, about choosing to believe that some people actually wanted to keep us safe without controlling us. I wrote about the girl who ran from the hunt becoming someone who could walk public trails and sit in classrooms and make friends who didn't know anything about survival training. Later that week during movie night, Luna fell asleep on the couch halfway through, her head on my shoulder, and Gabe was sprawled on the floor with his mouth open, finally relaxed enough to sleep in the open instead of barricaded in his room. I covered them both with blankets, amazed at their peaceful faces with no tension lines, no jumping at sounds, just 2 kids who felt safe enough to let their guard down completely. Jolene was reading in her chair, glancing up occasionally to smile at us, and our homework was spread across the kitchen table like any normal house with normal kids living normal lives. Before bed, I set the house alarm like I did every night, not from paranoia about attackers in the woods, but just regular caution like Jolene taught me, checking the locks once instead of 5 times like I used to. Looking back at my siblings sleeping safely, at Jolene turning pages in her book, at the dishes in the sink from our regular dinner, I understood that we weren't just surviving day to day anymore. We were actually living real lives with art shows and movie nights and homework, and all the boring, beautiful things we'd never been allowed to have before. Well, that's the thrilling conclusion you didn't know you needed. If you've stuck around this long, I don't know whether to respect you or worry. Either way, you're in too deep now. Might as well subscribe and embrace it.